Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Mia Frawley, and I'm the Director of People, Operations and Governance here in Cork Chamber. And it's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to you here today for our HR Barometer report, Unleashing the Strategic Role of HR to Drive Your Business and People Potential. This event is proudly brought to you through our partnership with Cork Chamber and Adare Trusted People Partners. The HR Barometer report provides critical insights into the evolving role of HR, highlighting how it can act as a strategic driver for business success and unlock the potential of your people. As part of Cork Chamber's commitment to supporting businesses and fostering excellence, this partnership with Adare ensures that you gain access to the latest trends, strategies, and actionable insights that can make a real difference to your organisation. Today, we'll explore key findings from the Barometer report, address emerging challenges, and share practical approaches. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to an engaging and insightful session. Before I pass you over to the fabulous team at Adare, I just want to make sure that everyone has their mics off. I just want to make you aware that we are recording for our own records. And if you have any questions, there'll be an opportunity for Q&A at the end. So if you want to pop your questions into the chat box, we'll go through them afterwards. I'm going to hand you now over to Sarah Fagan, who's the Managing Director of Adare, Amanda Finnegan, who's Head of Services, and Michelle McDonough, who's Head of HR Consulting with Adare. Thanks so much and enjoy the session.
Thank you so much, Neva, and it's delighted to be here to present the latest HR Barometer findings to Cork Chamber members. So on behalf of myself and the team of Adare, and of course Cork Chamber, you're all very welcome to the launch of the latest HR Barometer report, Series 8.2. In its 8th year and actual 12th publication, the HR Barometer report is the result of extensive research conducted by my colleagues in Adare, surveying hundreds of HR practitioners and business leaders around the country. And the data actually relates to over 74,000 employees around Ireland. The purpose of this report, as Neve mentioned, is to provide and gain insights into the emerging trends and priorities that are impacting employers, benchmark HR metrics to provide us and our clients some tangible data that help inform and support decision-making processes, and provide some forecasts on areas that are anticipated over the coming year. And so today is really about taking stock of those emerging trends, the key data and the forecasts that we would hope will help you lead out on your HR strategies, constantly remaining agile in 2025. And as we approach the upcoming year, there are so many considerations for all businesses in every sector. Competition in markets is driving innovation, and the right type of investment is the demarcation of those who will maintain that sustainability and those who will thrive in their growth journey. Prior to that, it's always important for us to take an initial step back and look at the macro impacts that are influencing sectoral and industry decisions. So if we reflect on the last 12 to 18 months, geopolitical tensions, high but decreasing inflation, the impact of interest rates, and now the outcome of the US election, all of which may continue to impact on the movement of trade, and for the Irish economy, that could result in significant supply chain challenges. And while the Irish economy has proved its resilience, it is reminiscent to 2016 or 2017, where in Ireland the economy was outperforming its international counterparts and managing the impact of a high but decreasing inflation. And even at that time, there were high employment levels and skills shortages. But the primary difference being those shortages were only impacting certain sectors, while now we're facing a continued global skills shortage, one that is unfortunately expected to continue for a number of years. So when we're considering our journeys of growth over the next 3, 5, or even 10 years, we have to ensure that we're operating in a manner that acknowledges the continued skills shortages and looks inward at our own businesses to drive people-led transformation and talent development that steps outside the box when it comes to labour and skills shortages. which is why, as ever, HR is so important. And to be that strategic partner within your business is now instrumental, in particular for HR leaders to be at the top table, influencing the strategic journey of our businesses and driving innovative practices and managing talent in a way that has never been done before. But in order to do that, we must ensure that whatever investment is made in our businesses and in our people, that we can attribute that investment to certain gains. Investment in HR is no longer a cost for the business, but a lever for growth. But how can we yield those gains or obtain a return on investment if we're not identifying the precise and exact metrics that will result in tangible business outcomes? And as HR leaders, it's crucial to identify those measurements that are unique to your own business in order to remain continuously agile and make those informed decisions. So as ever, we always commence with the strategic priorities for the upcoming year. And for 2025, we've seen minor changes. There tends to always be, or at least in the last 2 to 3 years, a number of similarities in relation to the key priorities and challenges that businesses are experiencing. And this year, it's no different. The very first priority for 55% of survey participants in the Munster region is employee engagement and experience. And how can we adapt our strategies to ensure that we are gaining that return on investment in relation to engagement and experience? We need to ensure that we're all taking a personalized approach, cultivating a sense of purpose to align the work with broader organizational values, fostering a culture where employees feel connected to their work, but balancing that with the autonomy to empower employees to take ownership and pride in order to make strides in our own employee engagement strategies and employee experience strategies. The second top priority for 36% of survey participants in the Munster region is talent retention. And when it comes to talent retention, I think if we reflect over the last 24 or even 36 months, businesses have been actively seeking to make gains in relation to talent retention. It now becomes even more important as we are experiencing the global skills shortage. And improved benefits will only take us so far. We need to ensure that we're adopting an analysis that will actually identify patterns. And that's why so many businesses are looking to predictive analysis to identify both the positive and negative trends so that when they're constructing their employee retention strategies, they will actually pay dividends from Q1 to the end of the year next year. So we need to strategically adopt those kind of practices into our retention strategies to truly make the strides that we need as a business. The third top priority, which in fairness hasn't featured, I would say, for a number of years in the Munster region, or at least identified within our HR Barometer findings, is workforce planning and management. 1 in 4 survey participants in the Munster region are citing it as a top priority. But workforce planning and management, in particular in the market and the constraints in which we're operating, does require a keen focus on flexibility and digital readiness. Organizations will need to anticipate those shifts in technologies such as AI, automation, and the remote work infrastructure, which will significantly influence the types of roles in demand. Ensuring that employees have access to continuous upskilling and reskilling programs will be essential to address the gap between existing skills and the future needs of your business. Moreover, companies will need to leverage data analytics to anticipate talent shortages and trends, allowing for more proactive workforce adjustments. Another key consideration is fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of your sustainable talent strategy. In 2025, businesses will be expected to ensure that their workforce reflects the global market's diversity, which will improve innovation and decision making. And workforce planning should also consider employee well-being and ensure that the engagement strategies are incorporated into it, as evolving work-life balance expectations and the need for mental health support will be critical for retaining top talent. Organizations that prioritize a people-centric approach and flexible policies will have a competitive edge in attracting and retaining a dynamic workforce. So before I hand over to my colleagues, it's really about anticipating what you will need both in 2025 and beyond to ensure that your HR strategies, as we start to prepare them this year, are evolving and adapting to the market influencers that are impacting the key business challenges and priorities as we move into 2025. So now I'm going to move on to the running order for the remainder of today's session. I will shortly introduce you to my colleague Amanda Finnegan, Head of Retained Services. Amanda is going to talk to some of the key HR metrics and working practices. In particular, we're always interested to understand how the code of practice on the right to request remote working is influencing our remote and hybrid working practices. So she'll pull out some of that key data and provide some of the key insights that we're seeing for the upcoming year. She'll then be joined by my colleague, Michelle McDonough, Head of HR Consulting, who's going to bring you through some of the key findings relating to diversity and inclusion, the gender pay gap in particular, as a lot more organizations are being brought into the fold with the lowering threshold in the upcoming year. And of course, because of the time of year that we're at, looking at performance management and what those frameworks consist of, what are the data that show the trends for the upcoming year and what other organizations might be planning to do is critical to ensure your competitive advantage. So Michelle will bring you some of those key trends and insights, following which she'll talk to retirement and pensions. And we've seen so much in the press in relation to auto-enrollment. How are we preparing and planning for that now as it approaches in 2025 from an implementation perspective? But also, what are the key considerations in relation to retirement when we're balancing it in a global skills shortage? Are there any key takeaways we would hope that there will be from this morning's session that you could bring back to your business? I'll then rejoin the session to give you some of the details relating to pay and benefits. In particular, again, end of year discussions are going to be commencing over the course of the next couple of weeks. What we're seeing across markets in relation to salary increases are key elements that you can bring back to your business to hopefully influence and impact on your own decisions this year. We will, of course, leave a couple of minutes at the end for any questions, as Niamh mentioned. So please do enter them into the Q&A function. And of course, I'll keep an eye on that in relation to any of the questions that I should put to my colleagues. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Amanda Finnegan, who'll bring you through some of the key HR metrics and working practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're always a little bit excited in sharing these insights because these things enable us to make really good decisions. I loved how Niamh said actionable insights, and that's absolutely what we're trying to share with you today. The first element that I address with you is HR metrics, and there's really three that I'd love to share with you. And the first one would be how many HR practitioners are in organization at the moment. If we are doing HR in the right way, we're able to really impact those key drivers within our organizations that gives us competitive advantage and really nurture the talent that we're trying to retain, engage them in the right way, bring to life our strategic initiatives from an HR perspective. And so throughout the survey, we address our participants and ask various questions to get their insights about what they're doing about these key metrics. And the first one, as I said, was how many HR team members do you have? So on average, the full-time equivalent HR staff that we have in the Munster region is 4.7. And if we put that in a ratio, HR to fixed fixed-time employees, it's 1 to 66. So if you're running that in your mind right now, looking at your business, or have you got the right support to address the macro initiatives that Sarah has just lightened up, just sharing how do we flex and compete consistently and being ahead of the crowd if we're not looking after our main resource in the right way. So that's kind of what this ratio gives us. 1 in 4 organizations in the Munster area will be adding to their HR headcount, and the percentage across the region is 18.6. So again, these unique individuals add so much value when we can focus in on the strategic initiatives that enable the business drivers in our organization. If we don't have the time and the capacity to do it, we always fall short. Now, the next metric is about our turnover. So if we're looking at retaining our staff, we ask the question, are you increasing your employees, number of employees? And 62% of our participants said they would. That then means that we might have lost some, or we're growing as a business. So are you increasing your headcount? The volume increase for this barometer is 9.9. That compares to the national data of 8.5. So the volume increase. Our suspicion is, you'll notice when you look at the employee turnover at 9.5, dropping and a little bit lower than the national average, that our retention strategies are actually working. Our engagement initiatives are making people want to stay. And so potentially our retention, our numbers then of that growth enables us with our business plans. The expected turnover for 2025 is 8.9 earlier this year. That was a little bit higher. Our national data is currently at 10. So how are we comparing to the national teams out there? So definitely enhancing our business impact, our productivity, enabling our innovation. And so the last element that we look at in HR metrics is learning and development. So what are we doing, and the initiatives and the priorities that we're putting out there? 100% of our participants are absolutely upskilling and reskilling for the future. It links so beautifully with what Sarah was saying earlier on about how we are as businesses flexing to make sure that we're competitive and innovative and surviving, thriving. And linked to that organizational agility, 75% of our participants were saying that they are focusing on those two initiatives. Continuous learning centric, employee-centric learning initiatives was another initiative. So if we're looking at that as a whole, those key learning and development enablers aligning with our future organizational needs means that we're being strategic. It's fantastic to see. You would notice that it says in 2024, the average overall payroll spent on learning and development was 4.7, and the intended spend for 2025 is going to be 6.4. That increase we've seen over a number of years is there's a practice of, in 1 year, we'll enjoy the yield of the harvest. So what we've invested in the one, we'll enjoy, and then we invest again. So next year is a year of investment. And we're looking at really spending some more time around key initiatives, which I'll share with you shortly. 1 in 4 organizations will be doing it. We always ask, how many days do you actually carve out for people to pause and really engage in learning? And in the Munster region, that's 3.6 average training days. National data says that's 4.2. So depending on where you're sitting, is how do you actually carve out the time for people to enjoy the initiatives you're putting out there? Now, if we're looking at that payroll spend, one of the big things we are concerned about is also how we report about it. So in this section, I'll cover that off. When we're looking at, have you introduced new ideas? The answer is 57% of us have. 43% of that participants were saying that we've actually gotten our own internal staff preparing that content for us. We've made it accessible and agile through technology, so providing it through e-learning. We've also made use of, 43% of us have made use of coaching and peer mentoring programs. We have 33% have had external e-learning providers bought that learning inside. Somebody else is the expert. We're going to make it accessible through our learning portfolio or platform so that our team can use it when we need to. Other initiatives is also around brought to life is soft skill development. We've seen there's a trend where we're investing in making sure that our teams are communicating better, are easy to engage with, have the skill set to do business with other organizations. We support financially the courses that we don't have internally, or know that there are the tertiary education facilities are better, or we're bringing that in. We're seeing an increase in use of mobile devices for the e-learning and making sure that people are learning as they are on the move. So if you're thinking about your own model, what is applicable? If I have a half an hour before my next meeting, but I'm out on site, would that be possible for me to do? So something to consider. Two additional insights about and learning initiatives is that nationally we're using AI. 16% of our participants are literally using AI to either curate their courses or influence the development of it. And is that something you potentially could be considering? And lastly, only 1% across the country are making use of gamification in learning. So in other words, putting leaderboards together, seeing how we are doing in completion, who's first done, who is the top performer in that course, who could be the next mentor in that environment, and assigning badges and creating a joyful experience around learning. So back to the question of how we're looking after the investment of that high number of 6.7 of our resource, 6.4, apologies. And 4 in 5 organizations don't measure return on investment, but what we do measure is employee engagement, 75%, activity on the learner management system, 50%. 50% are also looking, and this is far more in the right direction, about impact of organizational performance due to the learning. So could we do this before? Are we doing it better? The skills and knowledge retention, only 25% of us are doing it. So I highly recommend and encourage us as organizations to consider what are some of the things that you and I are looking at before we implement a learning module, and what's different from after it. And that measurement is something that we should be really considering. Is it a helpful? Is it a return on our investment and energy? Because that time, if we're limited resources, that time could be spent so well. So just really thinking about that. I typically encourage people who want to know more about return on investment in learning and development is that on our website, we actually have an ebook that enables this. And depending on your maturity and where you are at, you might find that helpful. So moving on to working practices. So if we are looking at these key metrics, what are working practices in the organizations right now? So from 2023 to 2024, we've seen a small shift in our hybrid work, but fully remote has dropped significantly. You can see that in our region, and fully on site has increased a little bit. And so I know you're wanting to know, so what does that look like in days? So in 2023, we had an average of 2.8 days in the office. Now in 2024, it is 2.9. National average is 2.7. We've all seen in the news there's some organizations that are pressing for 5 or 3. Your organization needs to really consider what's practical and objectively possible for your organization. So I really encourage you to consider that. And one of the things that we highly encourage is that you actually have a policy that gives you a guideline. It says, this is how we do it. Keep the conversation open. I'll talk more about that in a moment. When we asked our participants, have they benefited from the hybrid working environment, 73% of the participants said absolutely have seen productivity as positively impact. Honestly, there were 9% that said we didn't measure it before, so we can't say right now, and the differential was negative. When we asked, how do you define hybrid? There was a defined number of days in a workplace or operational requirement, or we looked at defined departmental or team requirements. And you can see that that has changed slightly from 2023 to 2024. So when we move on, we actually looked at some of the challenges that organizations have. This is a consistent element, and the initiatives we've put in place across the region to counter that. So at 43%, culture remains the top challenge from being in a hybrid working environment. 43% is team connection. People think they're one and the same. We know that they're not. Culture is the way that we do things repeatedly on a daily basis. Where team connection is, do I fit in? And do you make me feel part of it? And how quickly can we resolve conflict? That's kind of the feel of those two elements. And the levels of engagement at employee levels of engagement at 36%. Those are the challenges consistently being faced. What organizations have been doing in order of priorities, 47% have been looking at increased communications, whether that is from a central point, from HR, the senior leadership team, or from line managers. 32% is focused on employee engagement initiatives. You would have seen that that was the main initiative for the region, is that we are looking at how do we, through the employees' experience in the organization, enhancing that and putting real plans in place. And 32% has enhanced that with well-being. So if we are being together and we're coming into the office, you'll find it's really beneficial if those two initiatives, when we do something, that we link in something about well-being or inclusivity to really enhance the opportunity of connection. Coming back to the Work-Life Balance Miscellaneous Provision Act being coming to practice earlier this year, we asked two very specific questions, asking one, have you received requests to work remotely? And 2 in 5 organizations have. And the second question was, does that request look different from your current practice in the workplace? And only 3.3% has looked very, very different. That's different from the 8.2 average, national average. And this is where I want to just reiterate, we really encourage you to have a policy, but really have an open door around it. Continuously review the conversation. Make sure that it's, operationally objectified. It's about the organization and how it works. But that open door about retaining staff and listening to them about their requirements and what's important in the context about what is applicable for the business. It is very much a conversation, like a working relationship, is to just be very close to this as an organization and make sure that it serves both the organization and your staff members. I'm very delighted to introduce you now to my colleague, Michelle McDonough. She's going to be taking you through a number of insights. I hope you'll find them as actionable as I do. Thank you, Michelle.
That's great. Thank you, Amanda. I'm delighted to be with you all here this morning. I'm going to take you through some key strategic areas, and we'll focus initially on the gender pay gap in particular and spend a little bit of time around that because it is such a topical area for us at the moment. So we know the Gender Pay Gap Information Act came into force in Ireland in 2021, initially affecting organisations with 250 or more employees. And those organisations were initially due to report by December of 2022 and have continued to report December of 2023 and again will report in December of 2024. This year we have an increase and we have organisations with 150 or more employees will be due to report next month. So we look forward to seeing those results. And just to be aware that next year it is going to stretch out that bit further, and organisations with 50 or more employees will be obligated to report by the end of 2025. In terms of the legislation as it stands, that deadline date is December of each year, but there is talk in the government about that changing next year to be November. So just to be mindful and keep an eye out when we get updated communications on that, because it will give us a shorter period of time in which to turn around our reporting. As it stands at the moment, organisations will take a snapshot date in June, and that's the date on which their data is based on. So the quicker they get to analyse that data, produce the metrics, the longer period of time they'll have then to consider what initiatives they might put in place and to start to make some changes in that regard. So if we look at our HR Barometer data, one of the first questions we asked was how many organisations are currently legally obliged to record their gender pay gap. And we see the results in Munster have come out at 30%. So more significant or a higher volume for organisations than the national data, which is sitting at 23%. We also asked how many organisations were voluntarily deciding to record their gender pay gap, and that's coming out at 15% in the Munster region compared to 18% nationally. And that is because maybe organisations are seeking to get ahead of the curve and to be in a position to understand how to do the calculations quickly before they're obliged to publish it, because we know from what we're hearing on the ground that it is a lot more complex to do than probably was initially anticipated. And secondly, it gives them an opportunity to implement some of those change initiatives quickly, and perhaps to try and drive some improvements before they're in a position where they have to legally publish that information in a public forum. We also see that 1 in 2 of our organizations are not currently recording their gender pay gap. So interesting to get some stats on those. From a statistical perspective, in terms of what the numbers look like, the latest data from the CSO is 2022, and that puts the gender pay gap average for Ireland at 9.6%. To bring it up to a little bit more relevant or recent data, when we see those organizations that have been reporting since December of 2022, that stat initially came out at 12.6% in terms of the average for Ireland. And in the last reports from last year, that stat reduced to 11.2%. So we are already starting to see a decline from year 1 to year 2 in the national data in terms of what the reporting is like. And interesting to compare that to what our participants have told us from this current HR Barometer survey. And we see that in the Munster region, 1 in 3% of our participants believe that their gender pay gap to be below the national average. And they're reporting their gap at 14.6% as being average in the Munster region. And that compares to the national data from our HR Barometer of being 10.7%. So interesting to see that that's a little bit higher in the Munster region. Important to note that that doesn't necessarily mean that that there's a more of an issue in the Munster region, because one of the things we've observed, or one of the learnings, I suppose, that's coming out from the gender pay gap analysis so far, is that often in the short term, when people make changes like try to hire more female staff into the organization, that might in the short term cause an increase in their gender pay gap. And sometimes that takes a bit of time before those people can progress in the organization, maybe have opportunities to increase their salary. So that long-term impact can take a little bit longer in terms of driving that percentage gap down further. So we ask organizations, you know, what are the initiatives that are being introduced? And we see 3 in 10 of our participants have sought to introduce new initiatives to address gender balance. 1 in 2 organizations are delivering diversity and inclusion training in 2025, and that's often one of the first things that we do when we try and improve our focus on this, is about raising awareness by promoting those conversations to be had, so an organization can start to identify in their context what's most relevant to them and what might have the biggest impact for their teams. So good to see that coming out. And in terms of what those initiatives have been, we asked people to give us an insight, and we see that embedding diversity inclusion into the talent acquisition strategy appears to be one of the first things that organizations do. And like I said earlier, that initially could result in more females being employed, which is a positive thing, but might potentially drive the gender pay gap to be higher. So in the Munster region, that's sitting at 87%, so quite a high volume of the participants focused on that as their strategy, and that compares to 68% nationally. The second area of focus was around increased flexible workplace practices, and I suppose that goes back to Amanda's point of like listening to people, asking people, trying to understand what makes sense for those different people in your organization and different categories, and most likely those that might need a bit more flexibility to manage their different challenges. And we see that sitting at 80% in the Munster region, which again is high, and that compares to 66% nationally. We also see focus on inclusive recruitment drives, and we've seen some innovative practices around this area as well, in terms of blind resume reviewing or blind CV reviewing, and trying to use technology and AI to remove bias and to try and really make the practice more inclusive. So that's sitting at 60% for the Munster region in comparison to the 55% at a national level, which was interesting. I think it is important to be aware that if you're new to kind of having to go through the gender pay gap calculations, that it's not just about the metrics. Those initiatives are really, really important feature. And legally, in terms of the obligations, employers are obligated not just to report their metrics, but also to report what they're going to do, what initiatives they have underway, or that they might be planning to try and drive a change that's relevant in their context. And that's really important part to understand as well. And that's often the trickier element of this. At the moment, organizations will publish just by putting the results on their websites typically. There is a plan for an online portal to be created, but it's not yet in place for the 2024 cycle. So we do expect that to be up and running by the 2025 cycle, which means that people will be able to go to a particular online portal and upload their results to be published in a central format, which will obviously make it a lot easier for all of us to keep an eye on the outputs. One of the other things to mention in terms of the learnings is around shorter term measures like starters, leaver, promotions, pay increases have driven some of those positive changes. And there have been changes in how those calculations needed to be done over time. So in May this year, we saw some edits in terms of the Employment Equality Act give us some more guidance on specific changes that they've made around pay. So just to caution you on that, if you make sure that you have the most up-to-date insight into what's recorded from a gender pay gap perspective. And then finally, not only do we have to have a lens on gender pay gap, but we must always also be conscious of the EU Transparency Directive that's due to be transposed into Irish law in June of 2026. And although that seems like quite a while away, I suppose the word of warning in that particular piece is that what that legislation will require is that organisations that are 5% or above in terms of their gender pay gap will be obligated to engage in a joint pay assessment in cooperation with worker representatives. And that's going to really bring our level of focus and analysis and time and energy to a whole other level on top of what's currently required by the gender pay gap. And if we're currently sitting at 14.6% in the Munster region, and we know in 2026, if we're at 5% or higher, we're going to fall into that category of being obligated to do a lot more. And that will make the situation much more complex. And there's an opportunity for us in that time differential between now and June of 26 to really try to get on top of our gender pay gap, understand how to do the calculations, and more importantly, focus on those initiatives to drive improvements. Okay, so the next area I will look at with you today is around performance management. And it's always a topic that I advocate strongly about in terms of how it can be such a valuable tool for organizations. But it is difficult to get it right, and we're seeing that play out in our statistics. So 77% of our participants have performance management practices in place. Nationally, that is a bit higher in the 80s. So we're starting to see that increase. But unfortunately, it's still 1 in 10 that are finding their performance management processes are very effective, which is disappointing, but not surprising when we see some of the challenges in getting it right, particularly in more of a remote or hybrid work environment. 25% of our participants are having more regular reviews, and they're believing that would have the biggest impact on performance management effectiveness, which is definitely a trend. And 3 in 10 organizations are planning to change their performance management in the next 12 months. So that is somewhat encouraging. Nationally, that figure is 1 in 10. So it's good to see that it's a bit higher in the Munster region. So there is maybe a sense of awareness about the additional value that can be gained from performance management if we ensure that we put in place a really robust process and we try and maybe modernize it to reflect what the current workforce generations and working patterns are asking of us in order to make it a valuable tool. So some of the changes, just to give you some ideas, maybe your insights, are definitely on this trend of continuous feedback and dialogue. So no longer the once a year review, perhaps monthly, or quarterly, whatever makes sense in your context, but definitely that continual feedback, a focus on personal and work goals, more integrated learning and development focus. I think that brings a lot more positivity to the conversation, and it helps people connect with it more when they're having that clarity of expectations, feedback on their performance, and that's being turned into a conversation to drive on, okay, what are we going to do about it? So again, those actionable insights in those conversations and how the organization is going to support you to improve, and what career opportunities are there as a result if you engage in that way. And ongoing progress reviews with accountability and incentives. Again, very important in our new workplace practices that people have a clear sense of their accountability, and that they're incentivized to keep going throughout the year. But as we know, the pace of work is quite challenging. So it is helpful to have incentives along the year that help us monitor our progress and keep moving forward. And then the final area I'm going to look at with you today is around pensions and retirement. So from a retirement perspective, we see that 1 in 10 of our participants have no set retirement age or policy. 1 in 2 have a retirement age of 65 years. So that is still the dominant level that, you know, organizations, 50% there having a retirement age of 65. 4 in 5 of our participants have no plans to change their retirement age. So we're not seeing a huge appetite to really be radical with this. It's a much more cautionary approach, which is probably wise. 6% plan to remove the retirement age. So that will likely increase to say 16% maybe next year when we do this, that there are organizations that have none, but the majority of organizations are still retaining their retirement age as it is. And then we see 1 in 2 of our participants are allowing people to work beyond their normal retirement age. And I think that's how organizations are managing this situation, where they might not be changing their retirement age, but they are being very cautious around doing that objective justification of the retirement age that they have in place, and of the objective justification again for that particular individual in their particular context, and being very careful around that. We see 4 in 5 of the participants do contribute to a pension scheme on behalf of their employees, and that's sitting at 5%. So that's still the most dominant percentage in terms of the contribution that's being made. And then from an auto-enrollment perspective, obviously that's a big change for us in terms of what's coming into play next year. We now have a date, so we know that that's going to take effect from the 30th of September in 2025, and the government are calling it My Future Fund. So we have some terminology and language. In the last number of weeks, there's been a lot more information published on this. The government have produced an FAQ document, which is quite useful to give insight to employers. But at the time we ran our survey, we saw that 1 in 3 organizations were not going to be affected by auto-enrollment, and that's because they already have an occupational pension scheme in place. And we know that employees that are already in a scheme are not going to be auto-enrolled. We know that if they're aged between 23 and 60 and they earn 20,000 or more, then they will need to be auto-enrolled if they're not already in a scheme. But 1 in 3 of our participants were not prepared for auto-enrollment, not surprisingly, when we had very little information at the time. And even at that, of those organizations that will be auto-enrolled, there's an estimate there of 40% of employees will be affected by this change. So I suppose the lesson or the advice we're given to employers at this point is really just about understanding what your population pool is, who is going to be impacted, the practicalities of how you're going to put it in place. And we know it starts at 1.5% contribution for the employee and the employer for the first 3 years, and that's going to increase in scale. And then finally, to really focus on a comprehensive engagement and communication plan with employees, so that you can allay their fears, I suppose, and at least make them aware so they know in advance that this is coming into play and that they have plenty of notice. So we have between now and September of next year to really ensure that that's managed as a project, I suppose, and any other, and to just really get ahead of it. So hopefully what we've gone through there today has given you some key insights on those important strategic HR areas. And we'll continue now as I hand back to my colleague Sarah, who'll take you through the whole area of pay.
Thank you, Michelle. Great, as always, to hear some of the key findings, in particular in relation to gender pay, because of the changes that will be implemented in 2025. So now for this final section, we're looking at pay and benefits, and every year we essentially look to understand what the salary increases are and will be for the upcoming year. In particular, looking at the Munster region, what we have seen is that 85% of survey participants intend to increase salaries in 2024. And obviously, you know, over the course of years, as we've conducted this national survey, the percentage for salary increases tends to be much higher in terms of the amount of people who are applying those increases for the series 8.2. So again, November next year, we'll see a similar figure. But when we asked about the salary increases for 2025, a slightly lower amount, 72% intend to increase next year. And obviously, we'd likely see an increase in that in November of 2025. How that compares to the national data, well, in terms of increases in 2024, it's just 1 or 2% lower in terms of the total amount of survey participants increasing. And obviously, in terms of next year in 2025, a much lower percentage, 66%, say that they anticipate increasing salaries in 2025. The actual average percentage increase then that is being applied across sectors and industries in 2024 is coming out at 3.8% in the Munster region, which is just 0.1, slightly higher in comparison to the national data, where 3.7% is the salary increase percentage for 2024. Again, in 2025, which could be influenced slightly by the market challenges and the skills and labour shortages, we are seeing a slightly higher percentage increase anticipated in the upcoming year at 3.9%, which is a step above what is being seen nationally for 2025, where the salary percentage increase is coming in at 3.6%. Now, over the course of the last 8 years, when we've been developing this report and delivering the information to you, we've always tended to see a salary percentage increase between the 3 and 4%. I think it's worth noting as well that we did look at Labour Court recommendations and what is happening across sectors, unionised and non-unionised, in relation to pay claims. We saw 69 pay claims in a 6-month period, where 2/3 of those had a recommendation from the Labour Court to apply a salary increase of 3%, with 1/3 actually being recommended to apply a salary increase of 4% in terms of the claims brought to the third parties. And in particular, as we know, when the Labour Court is looking at any of these pay claims, they're looking at the financial feasibility and affordability for the businesses. So we would imagine or make some assumptions in relation to the 4% recommendations that those are applying in industries that actually have more bandwidth when it comes to the financial application of any percentage salary increases. One of the key areas that we really wanted to hone in on for this survey was in relation to changing pay models. And one of the questions we asked, the results of which being that 75% of survey participants in the Munster region, so that's 3/4, are saying that they have no intention to change their pay model in the upcoming year. However, 13% do intend to change their pay model. For us, the reason why it was so important to find this out is because we need to utilise 2025 in terms of preparing for the EU Pay Transparency Directive. As we know, the government tend to just announce these things without forewarning. The transposition could be earlier than what is required at an EU level, but there's also a lot of things that need to be considered. One of the key areas is that of the permit legislation that has been changed and adapted in terms of the requirements for salaries at 39,000 as opposed to what is currently or was in place at 30,000. And a lot of those differentiators are things that you're going to have to objectively justify in the upcoming year, and in particular when the transposition of the EU directive does occur. So looking at understanding across markets what organizations are doing in relation to their pay models is really critical, and we need to adapt and use 2025 to ensure that we're concrete in how we're applying any applications to salary reviews, to offering salary bands and so forth. And one of the key areas or reasons why organizations are intending to change their pay models is first and foremost retention of employees, coming in at 43% of survey participants in the Munster region. And obviously, you know, in terms of the key talent that is required for so many businesses when you're operating at full employment in a very significantly challenged global skills shortage, retention of employees is paramount to your success and driving your organizational goals and strategic objectives forward. So looking at your pay models is obviously one area, and for those in the Munster and Cork region, it's all about retaining their employees. The second reason is employee expectations, coming in at 29%. So almost 1 in 3 saying that they are adapting their pay model for that very reason. And the current pay model not being sustainable, a much lower percentage with only 14%. Now, nationally, when we ask the same question, the current pay model not being sustainable and as a reason was coming in at 30%. So 1 in 3 was saying it's not sustainable. And whilst we're seeing salary increases in terms of between the 3 and 4%, a lot of organizations are now taking the view that, you know, the sustainability element is not kind of being demonstrated or applied at a practical level in terms of affording salary increases of that range 3 to 4%. And a lot of organizations are looking at a lower percentage to ensure that they are maintaining the sustainability. But again, you know, when we come back to the change in pay model, it is only 13% in the Munster region that are looking at this. But we would definitely encourage, just as my colleague Michelle was saying, in relation to the Pay Transparency Directive, there's a lot of strategic work that can be applied, adapted and amended and reviewed throughout 2025. So really important that you are starting to use that time in that respect. Now, one of the key things, if we move to the next slide, in relation to salary increases are the contingencies. So what do we look for in terms of being able to apply salary increases across the board, potentially to employees and to your staff in your businesses? It has always been, for as long as we've conducted the survey over the course of the last 8 years, affordability and profitability are the very top 2 reasons. And obviously that makes sense at a very practical level. But for the Munster region, affordability is coming in as the main contingency for salary increases to be based on for 47% of survey participants. Company profitability then is slightly lower, with 45% of survey participants indicating that it is one of the key reasons that salary increases are being based on. Workplace changes being achieved for almost 1 in 4 is one of the key areas for salary increases. Now, we've seen so much movement in the market, in particular when it comes to recruitment, talent acquisition and talent retention, that, you know, there have been a lot of businesses and organizations that have necessitated certain change models, and with that have put some form of financial premise in relation to achieving those changes. And that's the same for those in the Munster region. 1 in 4 is very high in terms of applying salary increases just for those workplace changes being achieved. And again, you know, where we would be concerned is the sustainability element of that. Whilst obviously, you know, as anyone will know, leading out in a business, you're always trying to strike that balance, but we have to bring it back to the affordability and the profitability within the business, because that is how you're starting to reinvest in your business, reinvest in your people and so forth, which is why we introduced a new question this time around in terms of understanding where company profitability is one of the key areas that salary increases would be contingent on. We wanted to understand from businesses across sectors, what does that look like? So effectively, the question was, if salary increases are contingent on company profitability, what is the minimum threshold of profitability against plans that must be reached in order to apply those increases? Interestingly enough, and I do find this interesting, is that the majority, 50%, almost 1 in 2 survey participants in the Munster region are saying that that threshold actually is coming in at 70 to 79%. The reason I say it's interesting, obviously, in terms of the commerciality and the reinvestment that is required, it is always that top slice, that 10%, between 90 and 100%, sorry, of profitability, where you can start to reinvest in your business, reinvest in your people. However, when it comes to applying salary increases within the Munster region, it's only 11% that are looking for that threshold to be achieved in order to be able to reinvest. And then the middle area, where the threshold of 80 to 89% of profitability being reached by 17% of organizations. Now, in fairness, 22%, so 1 in 5 of our survey participants weren't aware of what the requirement was, and that could be relevant because of their role within the business, and they may not be privy to that information. But we really need to ensure, in particular over the course of the next 12 months, even 24 months, when disruptions are certain, that is the only certainty that we will have at this moment, either from a macro or economic point of view or geopolitical point of view. We need to ensure that we are mapping out our sustainability journey. And I'm not talking about ESG, I'm talking about the investment that you can put to your business because of your progress against your strategic goals and plans, whether you're offering services and products and so forth. So it's really important, again, that we are taking the time to review how our remuneration models and total reward models are being applied in the upcoming 24 months to ensure that we are maintaining that sustainability and that we're thriving in our growth journeys. The final area, it relates to the bonus payments, and again, it's very timely at this point of the year. We're all going to be having these discussions. We're going to be looking at our strategic goals, where we've landed over the course of the last 12-24 months. So it's really important at this time of year, when we're releasing this data, that we look at some of those key findings. So in the Munster region, 2 in 3 are paying bonuses in 2024. Not altogether surprising. There's a lot of progress that has been made by businesses, and a lot of recognition that is due to the employees and the staff within your businesses. However, 1 in 3 are not paying bonuses in 2024, whether that is due to financial constraints or progress against plans that is unknown to us. The reasons that we look for in terms of the basis for paying bonuses relate in the main for 7 out of 10 organizations in the Munster region to be based on the individual employee's performance throughout the year. And obviously that does make sense. We set KPIs for that very reason. But only 48%, 1 in 2, are saying bonuses are being paid because the organization is performing well and achieving its targets. You would expect to see that at a much higher percentage. But, lucky for those in the Munster region, that is not the case. 1 in 2 are going to be applying that. And then finally, 1 in 4, or almost 1 in 4, 24% are saying their top basis for paying bonuses relates to rewarding employees for their loyalty and staying with them in 2024. So again, it comes back to, the strategic priorities that I detailed in the Munster region for the upcoming year, and retention being one of the key areas that we need to be more innovative in our practices and take a holistic view, so that we're really trying to balance out both the financial and non-financial rewards that can be provided to the great skills and experience that is in our business, to ensure that we are maintaining that sustainability going forward. But as always, we look to understand what is the average percentage of salary being paid out in bonus, and across markets and industries within the Munster region, it's coming in at 9.8%, only 0.1% lower than the national average, where it was coming in at 9.9%. But as always, whilst we would hope at Adare that you're taking this information back to your businesses, that it's helping inform your strategic decisions, both now at the end of the year in 2024, but also in 2025. There is such a great deal of value in ensuring that we're delivering HR for growth. So the practical application of what we're doing from a remuneration perspective, from a total reward perspective, and how we're adapting our strategies to incorporate greater recognition in a non-financial means is one of the key areas that businesses should be focused in on to drive that sustainability and in effect drive growth, to hopefully have a more financially lucrative year in 2025 at the end of that year. So that is all of the key insights that we want to provide to you today. I just want to highlight that we will be providing you access to the Munster Key Findings Report. So members of the Adare team will be in touch with you to provide your online access details in relation to that. I'm just very quickly going to hop to the chat function. If you do have any questions for myself or a member of my team, please do include it in the chat function. One of the questions that was put to us relates to if the slides will be shared, so we will give you access to the report, but performance management. So Michelle, I might ask you to come in if you don't mind. One of the attendees here today just asked, regarding performance management, what trends in this are you seeing with the organizations? Do these include performance improvement plans, one-to-ones, coaching sessions, additional training, etc.? And have you any insight into what works well and what could be improved? So the secret ingredient, Michelle, over to you for that response.
Well, it's great to see there is an interest in that space, because as I said, I do think it's a really key tool that we can use as HR professionals. From the organizations that we've talked to this year, the thing that I find is really moving the dial or changing the way this is being managed in a positive way is business ownership. So it's not just owned by HR, it's owned by the business. And it's recognized as a really central mechanism to try and cascade business strategy or organizational strategy to help the individuals find meaning and connection to what the goals and objectives are, by translating it into team goals or individual purpose. Then defining behaviors. So your expectations are clear, your behaviors are clear. So we know we do that by values, we do that by maybe team charters or leadership charters. Those sorts really help to set the tone for performance management. So that's one of the key things I would say focus on first, is on clarity of expectation. And then from there, I suppose that in itself drives a culture. So instead of HR just going around chasing people up for ticking the form and you didn't fill it in right and you didn't sign it, and even, yes, technology is helpful to stop all that running around from the HR team and to, to encourage the sign up, but it's more about the culture and driving expectations. And then when line managers are having their own review conversations, that they're bringing that into the conversation as to, have you engaged with your team? Have you followed through on the performance review discussions, making sure that they happen on time, that they're followed up and closed out completely, that things aren't left lying. And then after that, as I mentioned, that whole link to learning and development is a massive piece. So having much more frequent conversations that are practically connected to what's happening in the organization from a day-to-day perspective, so people can relate to it in the short term. The feedback is agile, and if there are learnings identified, that we're actually pulling them out into an action plan or an individual development plan, and we're making sure that we implement those changes and that we're showing our commitment to the employee by following through on those things.
Thank you, Michelle. And I think, a critical time of year to actually adapt those from a practical perspective, in particular, as these conversations are going to be had over the course of the next 4 weeks. Thank you for that, Michelle. Amanda, I just have a very quick question for you. Obviously, in terms of everything happening within the market, there's a lot of change that is being applied. Have you any key insights in relation to change management when it comes to performance and really, I suppose, instilling that accountability within employees when it comes to their own career progression within the business?
That's a really good question. For the first part, how do we change behavior in an organization is what you experience on a daily basis. That's what you're going to get. So I love what Michelle was saying, actionable feedback in the moment, that kind of thing. But I think when we remember the human part of our relationship in organizations, change management feels like it's such a big, far out thing, but actually it's about when we have conversations and I have clarity about what my role is and what I'm around to do, what are the things that I need to do? And if I really drink that in and make it part of my day-to-day activity, that's the change you want. So the question is, when we are sitting down and doing our performance management element, or when we are having one-on-ones, so if we're designing the process, to Michelle's point, not having HR run around, but having real people conversations, human conversations. Like Niamh might be saying to me, Amanda, this is what I'd like you to achieve for the members in this year. And that might be feel like an instruction or a KPI or a goal. But if Niamh says to me, Amanda, this is the idea we'd like to experience in the chamber. These are the things that we'd like to achieve in the quarter 1, 2, and 3. Those feel like goals. But the moment Niamh and I have a conversation and I personalize it, I internalize it, that's the change. That's real change. And that's actually, you might know and remember that I love the ADCAR model. It's like, am I aware? Do I have the desire? Do I have the knowledge to do it? Do I have the skills? And does Niamh remind me, or my one-on-ones or my quarterly reviews, to do that? Now, you and I can memorize those 5 words, and we can have that in our one-on-ones, in our quarterlies, and our biannuals, and at the end of the year. That's changed on a day-to-day basis. So thanks for the question. But that's how I'd weave that into day-to-day life.
Yeah, a great response. Thank you, Amanda. And I think so critical for 2025, as we all try to, move into high performance environments and really encourage the teams. And like what I was saying at the beginning, we are in a skills shortage. We do have to look inwards within our business, but within that, there is so much opportunity. We have to move away potentially from the traditional roles and really drive that high performance accountability to make the progress that we're looking for as a business. So a huge area of opportunity, I think, coming into 2025. It's not all doom and gloom, and I hope everyone in attendance here today has been able to take some of those key insights and will bring it back to your business to provide some of those actionable items and truly be the demarcation of your success within your business. I want to thank everyone, in particular for Cork Chamber, for facilitating and hosting us and allowing us to present some of this key data. The strategic partnership is integral to us, and working with businesses throughout the Munster region is so exciting to us. So we do hope to engage with you all in the future. For 2024, we want to sign off and thank you all for all your support throughout the year. And again, to Niamh and Vicky, Annie and Connor in Cork Chamber, it's just been fantastic to be able to work with you and bring this information to your members, and hopefully they're taking those tidbits back to their business and making the difference that they want. So thank you so much again, Niamh.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks to you and your team as well. It's been really, really, I love these webinars because even if you think you know things, there's always things that you don't know, even if it's your day-to-day. So there's always a list that comes out at the end. So thanks a million. I found it really useful and informative. So thanks, and Amanda as well, and Michelle, you're great.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.